It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker of today, Professor Engin Kirda. Engin is a professor of computer science at Northeastern University in Boston, USA. Before that, he was a faculty in the Institute Eurocom in France, and Technical University of Vienna, Austria. There he co-founded the Secure System Labs, which is an international lab that spans now 5 institutes worldwide. His research has focused on malware analysis, and detection, on web application security and network security. He's been in the field for quite a while. He published over 150 papers in peer-reviewed publications, did a service to the community in 2015. He chaired NDSS, and in 2017, Usenik Security. And he also consulted governments, the European Commission in the past, and he also briefed he was in a congressional briefing in the US about advanced malware, and also presented malware in various forums. And besides being a professor, he was a founder of Lastline Inc., a Silicon Valley-based company, which specialized in detection and prevention of targeted malware. And this company was acquired by VMware last year. And we are very happy that he will tell us, it's an unusual title about his experience. It's called Transitioning Academic Research into Industry, Lessons, Experiences, the Good and the Ugly. So please, Engin.
Moti, thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot also for inviting me for this keynote. So yes, I'm going to be talking about transitioning academic research based on the single experience I've had actually with Lastline. But I figured for those folks out there who are in academia, who are actually thinking of maybe transitioning their research and maybe creating a company, some of the things we actually learned through the process. So I'll talk about some of my lessons, some experiences we've had, some good things and some also bad things about having a company like that and trying to grow it. So in this talk, just to give you an overview, I will first talk a bit about my research background. And I will then give a brief overview on some of the past academic research I've been involved in. This research led to the founding of Lastline, actually, with 2 other colleagues. So I'll talk about, malware and what we thought at the time was novel and what was kind of cool, and how that ended up being the foundation of a company later on, and why we actually decided to create a company. So I'll talk about some of those motivations. I will talk about the initial days and progress of Lastline from 2009 until 2020. So I'll talk a bit more about the initial days and some of the difficulties we had. There were always difficulties at every stage, but later, after talking about the initial days, I'll talk about where the company ended up, and then I'm going to discuss some lessons that I distilled from our experiences. So I'm going to be talking about, I distilled about 10 lessons. Some of them to you might sound obvious, but being a professor for me, it was just things I had heard. I didn't know they were actually true. So I'll summarize each lesson. I'll talk about what they basically meant to me and what I would do differently maybe today. So my background in terms of research is I moved to Northeastern in January 2011, as Moti was also mentioning. I was faculty in Europe before. So half of my career so far I've actually spent in Europe at the Technical University of Vienna. Then I moved to, for a short stint, to Institute Eurocom in France. I'm mainly active still today in these areas. So malware analysis and detection since 2004. It's getting close to 2 decades now, quite a long time. Web security also, it's an interesting area. I'm still publishing in this domain. And in general, securing systems of all sorts. So if you ask me what kind of a researcher are you, I would say I'm a systems security researcher because I'm interested in all practical security problems. So we try to create solutions, create software that addresses all those cybersecurity issues out there, but not really a lot of theory. So I'm really bad in theory. So how did this whole thing begin, right? How it all began? So in 2004, malicious code was important. A decade before that, it was also very important. But back in 2004, it was starting to become very important. Today, it's even more important than it was back in 2004. But there was a wide variety of malicious code out there. So, viruses were still a thing. There were worms, spyware, rootkits, Trojan horses. So we have a bunch of these things today. But things like worms and viruses are sort of obsolete, not like in 2004. So things have changed. But in any case, we still have this issue today that the common characteristic is that they perform some unwanted activity on your system. And today, for example, ransomware has become a huge problem, right? So attackers are still making money using malicious code, but they're discovering new ways of making money. And of course, Bitcoin has become much more important. So it's easier to get the money, right? So you don't have to mail them a check like back in the 1980s or 1990s. So no doubt everybody has heard of viruses, right? Worm epidemics or spyware. All of these things today are called malware. But like a decade ago, 2 decades ago, the people were just talking about viruses in general, and the term malware, not too many people knew. So there are reports in mainstream media, and a lot of people have had some personal experience, at least with anti-malware, anti-virus scanners, right? A lot of people use them to protect their system. So malicious code analysis has been an area of interest for a lot of companies for quite a long time, but it has been an area of interest for system security academia for, I would say, close to 20 years now. So understanding the functionality of malware programs automatically is important. So you're trying to understand how the system has been compromised, and you're asking yourself questions like, okay, how is the program launched? What malicious actions are being performed? Are there any hidden functionality that you can try to automatically trigger? Is this thing that is infecting your machine disabling defense mechanisms? How is it interacting with other processes, right? You can do all of this stuff by hand. And in a lot of cases, people sit in companies and they're actually analyzing this stuff by hand. But of course, you're very interested in trying to automate that. And that creates a very interesting research problem then. So understanding malicious code, understanding malware automatically is important for detection, but it's also very important for removal. And because the numbers of malware have been increasing, 2 decades ago, they were high. Today, they're even higher. So you need to keep up with the increasing number of samples that are coming in. So your analysis has to be fast, it has to be automated, and it has to be precise, right? If I say this is malware, if I say what it does, I want that malware to be analyzed really precisely so that I can take it to my analysts and they can do something with it. So this at the time, it was also interesting with regards to automated malware collection, right? Honeypots. People were setting up these honeypots on the internet, and they were collecting all the malicious samples. Well, but they wanted to know, okay, what are we actually collecting, right? If you try to analyze that by hand, it does not scale. So you want to scale it up as much as you can, basically. So there are 2 ways of analyzing malware, right? 2 main ways of doing it. So one of them is static analysis, and the other one is dynamic analysis. So people have looked at static analysis in academia for a long time, until say 2004, 2003. In static analysis, the code is not executed. And the cool thing is that you can analyze all possible branches, right? In theory, it's quite fast. But we're seeing the problems of static analysis because in a lot of the cases, the problems are undecidable and you need to approximate, right? The binary code contains typically very little information. It's actually very difficult to disassemble, especially for the x86 architecture, which is still the case. You can have obfuscated code, you can have packed code, you can have self-modifying code, and you can have code that changes itself. So, and the malware authors were actively doing this. And because of that, people started thinking, 2 decades ago, that static analysis, this is useful, but it has a lot of limitations. So that's why people started shifting focus around that time to dynamic analysis, which is something that also became interesting for us as academic researchers. And we thought, hey, let's start looking into dynamic analysis ourselves. So dynamic analysis means that your code is being executed and you're actually seeing the instructions that are being executed. So, everything is being run. And it can be useful because then you don't have to deal with any of the problems that you have with static analysis, right? You don't have to disassemble anything because you're basically running the code. There are problems with dynamic analysis though. So in general, you're executing a single path, right? So you have a single execution path. There are problems that your analysis environment might not be invisible to you, right? Your analysis might not be comprehensive. Your analysis environment might not be comprehensive. There are scalability issues. And so these are all very interesting research questions, right? So around that time, dynamic analysis started getting some interest. And we thought, okay, these are very cool problems to attack. Can you actually run the code and run multiple execution paths, for example? We thought from a research point of view, putting students on this, trying to explore this would be interesting, because back then, around 2004, there was also not too much academic research looking into these questions because people thought, you don't want to deal with Windows, it's a closed source, it's difficult. And you also need to start getting malware samples to start doing malware research. And that ended up not being too easy. So people were sort of like scared of looking into this, but we thought, can we actually do something, collect samples and go into this research domain? So possible analysis environments you can create would be, you can instrument the program, you can instrument the operating system, you can have hardware. So the different things you can do. And we thought, and people had started doing them, but they also had some disadvantages, right? If you instrument the program, for example, and you're changing the code, it's easy for malware authors to detect that change, right? So we thought maybe we can do something where, it would be more difficult to detect for malware authors. So we were looking at this problem very academically, very scientifically, and we also wanted to produce research papers that people would read and people would cite. So as I was mentioning, one of the main issues though was how do you get started, right? So you want to do research in 2004, you want to do dynamic analysis, you want to build a system, but how do you get these malware samples, right? And it turns out back then, getting malware samples actually was not trivial. Today, you can go to VirusTotal, they're going to give you a lot of samples, but back then, it was actually difficult. And if you reached out to people, for example, Symantec back then, and you said, hey, can you give me some samples because I'm a professor, I'd like to do some research. The answer was often either they didn't answer you or they were a little concerned because they did not want to give you malware samples because they don't know you and they didn't know what you would do with it, right? So you had to be in the circle of trust so that you can start getting lots of malware samples. So antivirus companies were actually quite reluctant at the time to give out samples, unlike today where getting samples is actually not difficult, right? For Android, for anything you want, reach out to people. People are not scared to share these samples. So another thing that people were concerned about back then was that the engineering overhead was very high. So Windows was not an open source, it still is not an open source operating system, although we know more about Windows today than back then. So it meant that, well, you have to do the reverse engineering yourself, figure out how to instrument the operating system, and things could also change. So we thought at the time, all right, let's create our own malware analysis service. Let's put it online. Let's advertise it a bit. And hopefully people are going to submit samples to us. We do our research, we analyze those samples, we provide something nice to them, value to them. But we also collect samples and we can do some interesting research with the samples that we collect, right? So you can collect the samples, you can share samples, you can analyze trends, and hopefully you produce some academic papers that are also useful in practice. So that was our goal back then. So we created Anubis initially at the Technical University of Vienna around 2004. we started working on it. We had a smart student who built the initial analysis system. I think it went online maybe a year after that, maybe 2006 or so. So Anubis it stands for Analyzing Unknown Binaries. It's also in Egyptian God, actually. This URL was online for a long time, for about a decade. We maintained this service. We provided hardware for it. We provided engineering support for it. And people ended up submitting quite a bit of samples to us because they found it useful. So it was an online service where internet users could submit binaries. Anything you found, any malware you wanted to be analyzed. We generated reports that describe the actions of the binary. And after running this for a couple of years, we ended up having quite reputable users, right? At the time, Shadow Server, Team Kimru, the CERT in Australia, a bunch of law enforcement agencies, and many anti-malware companies discovered this service. They liked it. They actually didn't know we were behind it. They just saw this URL and they liked it. They started using it. And people also even started integrating this as a part of their daily workflow, right? For example, in Australia, in CERT, they found something, they submitted it to us automatically, and it was part of their typical daily analysis, right? It became a part of their work. So what kind of information did we provide? Well, the process interacts with the operating system using system calls, and the operating system, creates files. You have network connectivity. You play around with the registry. So our system that we built was monitoring system calls, but unfortunately, on Windows, system calls were largely undocumented. They could actually change without notice. So doing something like this was a lot of engineering effort, but we thought if we invest the engineering effort, at some point, it's going to result in good research. And we were lucky; it ended up being like that. And developers were supposed to use the Windows API, which is stable, but of course the Windows API could be bypassed. So we took the hard way. We said, okay, we want to monitor system calls. We want to instrument the operating. So how do you do this? Well, we decided to actually use an emulator. So a lot of people were instrumenting the VM. They were instrumenting the binary. We thought these are all evadable potentially. So we thought, the better thing to do here is to build an emulator to emulate everything, including the hardware, because it'll be more resistant to evasion. So back in 2004, as academic people, although industry didn't really care that much about dynamic evasion, we had already started thinking about how can you create a sandbox, an analysis environment that's actually resistant to evasion, because if you submit papers to academic conferences, these are the type of questions you get, right? People say, yeah, nice system, but it can be evaded. So we wanted to actually address this in advance, looking at the problem more, academically. So the typical analysis report that we generated was looking at file activity, it was looking at registry activity, it was looking at service activity, is something being started in the background, is it being stopped, process activity, and of course, network activity, right? So you have packet logs, you have API calls, because you want to automatically analyze and see what this unknown binary actually does, where it connects, and hopefully you also extract domain names that are then interesting because these are potentially malicious domain names. So just to show you the initial Anubis architecture. So over the years, it's changed a lot, but the initial architecture was you have a bunch of data inputs, right? You have honeypots that we set up that other people had set up. You have a public web interface where you can go and upload a sample. There were similar services on the internet back then, but Anubis ended up being well-known and popular as well. There were active web crawling, right? We went out on the web and we were actually collecting samples and then submitting it to Anubis ourselves. Mail was coming in. We were taking out the attachments and submitting it to Anubis. And we were also generating a bunch of analysis reports. We were then, on top of this, trying to extract botnet command and control information. We were trying to do some sort of detection, right? So we have papers on that. And we also looked at things like, okay, I have all these samples now. Can I use some machine learning? And that was back in 2007, before AI became a buzzword. Can we use machine learning to do automated clustering, right? To cluster all these malware samples so that I can automatically say, okay, I know this family. I've never seen this family before, etc. Right? All of this stuff, the foundations were created within Anubis. And then we also published a bunch of papers in a lot of good conferences. And people started using the system, they started reading the papers. So if you have a system like that, one thing you can then do, of course, is malware detection. So you can run simple rules on the output, right? So you can look at things like the number of contacted IP addresses, maybe you find that fishy, or you look at keyboard loggers. If you detect one, well, that's fishy, so you can take that as a score, right? You can look at suspicious IRC traffic or botnet-like traffic. Is something being copied to the system directory, right? So you can use simple rules that we started using. So we were doing dynamic analysis, but we're using that to do detection as well. And you could also do a very powerful analysis by doing things like tainting and information flow tracking, because you have an emulator that you can completely instrument, and that gives you a lot of detailed information about the malware sample, what it does, etc. So this ended up in lots and lots of academic papers, and we sort of became well known in the area of malware research academically, because we were one of the few groups at the time who had started publishing on malware, and people found that interesting in general. So Anubis became quite popular, and it started attracting thousands of users and fans. And besides Anubis, we started working on other technologies. Wepavet, for example, at UCSB, was for JavaScript analysis, and that became hugely popular. And people started using Wepavet for a drive-by download analysis. Also, companies started using it. We developed exposure in France for detecting malicious domain names, and we ran that as a service as well. So every day we were generating lists of potentially malicious domain names, and companies started getting interested in this, and some of them started using these data feeds in their products, right? And around 2008, we started receiving quite a number of licensing requests from users, right? Some users said, look, I have a company, I would like to use your service, and I'd like to integrate it, and I'd like to use it as a part of my product. And some companies started to make offers to us. They wanted us to consult to build similar systems that they could use internally in their organizations. And our typical answer was, yeah, but this is an international project distributed across many universities. We're academic people, we're not interested in selling this, and we can't really sell it because it's being built with research money, and these are open services. You can't just take Anubis and give it to someone so that they can basically just use it, right? We can't sell it. So that was our classic answer. But because we started getting a lot of interest around October 2009, we actually thought, okay, we all published, we're all pretty established in our domains. I was a social professor, Chris Krugel as well at UCSB. Giovanni Vigna had already promoted to full. We had published quite a number of papers. So we thought, okay, maybe it's actually time to create a company. There seems to be interest around Anubis and around malware in general, right? So we said, let's create a company. And one of the motivations was also, well, if we create a company and we start collecting even more samples, that would give us more resources, and we can even publish more interesting papers, because then you have access to real networks, real customers, and you're seeing real problems. And we thought this is actually this could be a nice thing. Of course, financially, we also thought, hey, if this works out, and the company at some point becomes successful, well, maybe you can retire early as well. That's not a bad thing, right? But that was not the main motivation. Our motivation was, we've actually done quite a bit academically. What's next, right? What's the next challenge? We thought maybe it's time actually to create a company. Although we were actually against it for a long time, because we thought, yeah, it's not interesting. I don't want to deal with customers. The problem was there was no money and there was no product, and everything had to be created from scratch, right? You can't just take existing code and use it. So yes, you have Anubis, you have Wepavet, but all that intellectual property, how it can be created, but you need to create it from scratch. You want to improve it as well, right? If it's been written in, say, Python, well, maybe it's not the best idea, right? You want to write it in a language maybe that's more maintainable. So you know how to improve things, but that's going to take a lot of effort, and that's going to take money, and it's going to take engineers, right? And you can't just start from scratch and rebuild something like Anubis, because it's years of work that has taken to actually create it. So that was a problem. The solution was, and that was actually ended up being a good solution, was we licensed Anubis and Wepavet from UCSB. So UCSB was running the infrastructure for Anubis and Wepavet, and they were nice to us, and they said, for a small fee, you know what, you can just use all the data that you produce using Anubis and Webpavet, which is running at UCSB. So you can't sell Anubis and Webpavet, which is not something we wanted to do. But we thought we can take the data that we're producing, which is loads of data about malware, and maybe build something around it, something new around it, right? So we could use the malware analysis capabilities and the infrastructure that already saves you a lot of money, right? Because creating an infrastructure like this is, thousands of dollars, very powerful machines, many powerful machines. But it's nice if somebody says, well, you can use my infrastructure, take the data, pay me a reasonable license fee, and build something around it. So we created the company in California. We put in some money, but regardless of how much money you put in, well, the money is not going to be enough probably with your professor's salary. So how do you people to work with you or work for you, right? You still need engineers. You don't need to invest money initially for the infrastructure, right? For this malware analysis infrastructure, because your university is helping you, but you still have to pay people. You still need business people, and you still actually need money. And initially, you need to create a product, right? How do you actually do that? The solution we decided to go with was we offered equity from the company for work. So former PhD students, former engineers, smart people, postdocs who had actually worked on some of these systems, we said, hey, we have this new idea. We're going to create some malware detection product. You get a part of the company, we'll give you equity. Everybody works for free, but you'll be part of the core technical co-founder team. And then once we actually have something we can show, we're going to go out there, we're going to look for money and hopefully start attracting other people, and we start basically selling this, right? But you still have to invest maybe a year, a little longer to actually create the initial product. So this is what we did. And the initial product was bot detection, which is something we worked on until 2011, because we thought, hey, bots are a huge problem. The solutions out there are not great. So if we create a product that detects botnets in your organization, similar to what Damballa was doing at the time, it was a Georgia Tech spinoff, we thought this could be a great idea and people will definitely be interested in this, right? They're going to say, yeah, I want to detect bots in my network. I'm going to buy this. So that was the original idea, and we thought that would actually fly. So I moved to the US in January 2011, and one of the motivations was to be closer to the company that was headquartered in Santa Barbara. So Giovanni Vigna and Chris Krugel were at UCSB, and they were in Santa Barbara, but I was in Europe, so it's a very long distance. We thought, okay, now it's a real company. It's taking off. We're going to start things. It's easy if I'm on the, say, East Coast, because the distance is just less, and I can travel more often to Santa Barbara if I need to. So that was basically one of the motivations. We also started looking at raising money as an initial step as three pretty much unexperienced professors, right? Okay, so you create a company, now you need to raise some money. Okay, how do you actually do this? So we were initially quite lucky in the sense that there was interest from industry because of Anubis. So people had heard of Anubis, they had heard of Webpavet. And when we actually reached out to people, they were willing to listen because there's this free service out there that you've created. And sometimes people are directly reaching out to us through our connections, like Bain Capital, which is based in Boston, if I'm not mistaken. They actually reached out to us and said, hey, let's talk, maybe you can do something, which was great. So we started getting some initial meetings, right? The end result was that we failed to get VC money completely. It was a disaster. And the reason probably was, if you talk to Bain Capital, I was talking to a more high-level person initially, and you actually realize that things are not going to work out when they actually shoot you down to some intern or some low-level employee who's been there for a year, right? So when I started talking to the lower-level employee, I was giving updates on our plans, but I knew, okay, this is probably not going to work. And I think the reason was they talked to us and they probably figured, okay, these are three technical people. They're talking about malware. They really haven't done anything with respect to business. They have no idea. And if you look at the universities, if you're Stanford and MIT, it might be easier for you to raise money just because of the name recognition. They probably thought, yeah, interesting work. Let's just wait and see what these guys are going to do, right, before actually putting in any money. So that idea totally failed. Eventually, though, we managed to raise $1 million of angel investment. So that actually helped us a lot. Probably one of the most important phases in the company, and the most difficult phase probably, because it allowed us to actually start hiring people, paying people, and start working on the product for real, right? And we managed to raise it through our own connections, because Giovanni and Chris knew a former professor at UCSB who had created a company and who had then basically started doing this full time. So he left his academic job, and he had success. He had created a number of companies. So, and he believed in us. And one reason why he believed in us was probably because we were able to demonstrate that we were able to sell something. So we did everything possible. We underpriced whatever we had, and we made a couple of sales. And seeing that, they probably thought, okay, these guys are professors, they're clueless about business, but they managed to sell it. So, maybe there's potential in this. Well, they were nice. He contacted his friends, and we raised some initial investment. But through our own efforts and, no VC money. So in August 2011, we started hiring engineers. And so we managed to convince all of our former, PhD students and former postdocs, which was remarkable. So they actually all agreed to move to the US for the company, and which was great of them. It's a huge change. So we applied for H-1Bs for them, and we managed to get almost the entire core team from Europe to Santa Barbara, and we rented a small office. And until they came, actually, we were in a smaller office. This was our first office. You can actually see Giovanni Mini on the right side. So we had this super small office over the summer where everybody was, you just had a couple of people. So, like a typical startup story, yes, it started in a very, very small office without a restroom. So to go to the restroom, people had to pick up a key and then return the key, right? But then when we raised the money and we started getting our core engineers, we went to a real office, and things started becoming a bit more serious, right? And every stage of the company, there were problems. Every stage of the company, there were challenges. And at every stage, we probably thought that these challenges were impossible to solve, difficult to solve, or the worst we've seen so far, right? That's always the feeling you get. But since 2011, in a decade, what actually happened in exactly a decade was we managed to raise about $52 million of VC investment all the way through Series C. We managed to hire a bunch of professional people, CEOs, lots of salespeople. So if you bring in business people, they know people, so they are going to hire your salespeople. So the company grew to about 140 employees over the years. It had offices in Europe, Asia, and US. So we had a bunch of good engineers in London, for example, before Brexit, because a lot of Europeans thought, London, I can live with it. I don't necessarily want to move to the US, but it's a good compromise, and it was part of the EU. Sadly, that's not the case anymore. The headquarters then moved from Santa Barbara to the Bay Area. So we became a real Silicon Valley company. And we made a lot of OEM deals with companies that were, in the security field. So they were using us as the backend for their customers. And we were providing threats intelligence and analysis services to them. So when they received the malware, they didn't have their own sandbox. So they were actually using our sandbox as a cloud service. And we were selling this service to them, which had its own problems that I'm not going to go into, but that actually helped us create quite a bit of revenue. And at the end, we had hundreds of customers, from small companies to larger companies to banks in almost all areas. And we managed to protect millions of end users. And we had, I would say, decent success, right? So very tough field. You're in the security field. There are many companies, especially in the last 5 years, many companies were, founded and created. If you go to Black Hat, you see many, many names. So it's a tough field to compete in. But we ended up having some customers. We managed to keep some customers. And at the end, we were acquired by VMware because we thought, hey, this is actually a nice way to integrate our product that we had created into their cloud. And VMware has been, continuing with Lastline since 2020. And at some point, of course, Lastline will disappear, and it's being integrated into VMware products right now. So now I'm going to move on to some lessons that I distilled through this process. So I'll try to summarize some key lessons. In a way, it was like doing an MBA for us, right? So you've never done real business before. You are an academician, right? You're a professor, you know how the university works. And you're interested in creating novelty and innovation, but not necessarily talking to customers, salespeople, sales channels. So in a way, we all felt like, you know, we've actually done an MBA because I feel like I understand these things better now. So it was quite a bit of learning, right? So I am an academic who ended up turning entrepreneur, maybe because of luck, but it's not exactly your typical entrepreneur, right? So a lot of people create companies, but if you look at companies being created in companies and professors becoming entrepreneurs, there are examples, but if you look at the big picture, it's not like there's a huge army of people, right? Although there could be, right? Because CS is a very exciting field. So what does it mean to take an existing research prototype and to create a product out of it, right? I'll talk a bit about that. What are the key lessons for starting a spin-off with a university background? So if you're a professor or a PhD or a postdoc, right, you're creating a company, what does that mean for you, right? With all your experience in an academic field, right? And finally, would I start if I would start a company again, what would I do differently this time, right? You know, what would I focus on based on the experience I've had with last time, right? And also note that these are just my personal thoughts. One thing I've actually learned, it's not a lesson, but if people talk to you about their, you know, serial entrepreneurship, how much success they've had, I become a little skeptical because luck is part of the game, right? Yes, you can prepare for certain things, but just because you've had success once doesn't mean that you know the game and you know exactly how things work out, right? A lot of things could have gone wrong. Some of it did. A lot of things could have gone right and it didn't, right? So there's a luck factor as well, but there are some lessons that you can draw. And if you focus on them, and I think it just increases your chance, in my opinion, of having success with a startup, right? Many of them fail. And, you know, when I look at that, sometimes I feel like now that it's obvious why it failed, right? So the first lesson is, I would say, is it's indeed true that the team you create is a maker or breaker in a software tech company, right? This is a classic thing that people say, but it's absolutely true, right? Inefficient team members are toxic in a small company and they actually block progress. So who you hire, how good they are, the initial core team are extremely important. That's the reason why people say that they don't invest in ideas, they invest in like teams, right? Because ideas can change, but like if you have a core team and smart people, those smart people and often end up doing something good, right? So technical talent is decisive, but you also need top-notch leadership and sales team. So one thing I really started appreciating is the industry. I used to think, you know, salespeople, yeah, but you know, what do you need for sales? I actually ended up learning that a lot of them are very smart. Not all of them, but a lot of them are smart. And also the leadership team at the C level, right? Your chief, CEO, etc. Many of them are very smart and experienced people. Of course, some of them are also very toxic, right? But you need a good leadership team. We were lucky because the co-founders, Giovanni, Chris, and myself, knew each other well, and we had worked closely together before. And I think it's a key success factor. If you work with people before and you know them well, it increases your chance of success because it's not like random people met each other and now they're creating a company. That actually can create a lot of conflict. And sometimes it was actually us co-founders against the rest of the company, right? Because we knew each other, so there was no backstabbing, there was no, if there was conflict, we talked about it. But you know, that joint front of founders getting along together creates good vibes in the company because people know, okay, you know, these guys actually understand each other, they're working together, and it doesn't create more problems. The second lesson that I distilled was that as a co-founder, unfortunately, you do not have the luxury to vent off. And this is emotionally extremely draining, right? You want to vent off about some of your employees. You want to tell them, stop doing that, or like, stop creating the drama, or like what you're saying right now, don't do it, or like, why are you complaining all the time? But you really can't, right? You need to make sure that everyone is motivated. You are the co-founder, you set the culture, and it ends up being emotionally draining. And this is one thing that I really did not enjoy. Always trying to smile, always trying to put a positive spin on things is what you need to do. You cannot create emotional drama. You don't have that luxury, unfortunately. It would be cool to say, I hate everybody, but you can't do that. Right? You need to be controlled at all times. You cannot share raw information that might demotivate your workers, right? Sometimes you want to say, hey, we're in trouble right now because of X. This is not good for us. But you can't always, of course, you don't want to lie, but you can't just take the unfiltered truth and just give it to people because they'll be demotivated, and that's going to hurt your company and everybody at the end, including your employees, right? So that is also emotional draining. You can't just delegate problems to someone else you hired and expect them to succeed. Sadly, it would be great to hire an engineering lead and say, you deal with all these issues, but you often end up being involved in, all the conflict, all the issues. You can't just expect everyone, sales, engineering, support, to do well without your help and input. It turns out even for sales, you need to be involved often, right? Like Chris was traveling a lot, meeting with customers. A lot of us, talk to customers with our salespeople, trying to explain them why they should buy us, right? So you are always involved. So it's actually quite a bit of work, and also emotionally, it takes a toll. Lesson 3 is you will meet many talented people with excellent resumes, right? Some of your salespeople are going to have 20 years of experience, and they all look great on paper, right? A lot of them have degrees from top-notch universities, right? Someone has gone to Stanford, so that might impress you. But you need to be cautious, because in a startup, my experience has been that years of experience do not linearly and automatically map to success. Someone might have 15 years of experience in a large company, but they're not the best fit for a startup company, and they fail, right? Or they might have been in startups, but not exactly in security. So yeah, they were a great salesperson before, they're smart, but they just cannot pick up what you need, right? So that experience, and if somebody comes to you and says, I have 20 years of experience, well, I've learned to be skeptical, right? So lots of factors here, right? Does your employee know the product? Do they know the area? How hungry are they for success, right? So we've actually had people who are very smart, who were very successful. They had made a lot of money as salespeople in other companies. But by the time they come to you, you realize they're not hungry anymore, right? If this works, it's fine. If it doesn't work, well, they still have made enough money. It's not going to hurt them that much. So you actually need people who want to be successful. And that's an important criterion as well, right? And sometimes there's also the survivor's benefit, right? People do get lucky sometimes in their careers, right? Just because they've had success once doesn't mean that they're always going to be successful. Sometimes you're at the right place at the right time. You join a company, a year later they go IPO, and the stock takes off. If you were at Moderna, maybe 2 years ago you thought, well, I'll do well, but today you've done really well, because suddenly it became a very popular company, right? So luck is sometimes part of the game, and you need to be aware of that. So lesson 4 for me was, if you're a co-founder, you need to be mentally prepared to do a lot of things you actually are not going to like, right? For example, your role could be a filler. So I managed support, right? Customer support for a while. And I did not enjoy it. And I'm not a customer support person. I'm a researcher. I like doing technical stuff. I like, that's what I like, but somebody had to do it. So, well, somebody had to volunteer for it, right? So a lot of us ended up doing things we did not necessarily enjoy, but somebody had to do it, right? So you might not love talking to customers as a tech person, but that's part of the job, right? If you're an academic person, don't want to do anything with customers, well, then creating a company like this, an enterprise company, well, you're going to be in front of customers. You need to convince them as well. So as a researcher, you want to create, but a lot of product development is actually working on features that might not be exciting for you, right? So you end up having to develop a feature for Windows, right? For Active Directory. It has nothing to do with security. It has nothing to do with, your core product, but it's still important because your customers are asking for it. So sometimes people need to be fired, right? Which is something that, well, you might enjoy, but it's something that I personally don't enjoy, but it has to be done, right? Like I find it a difficult thing, right? And hiring, well, is a very intensive, it's a very difficult job. I found that. I interviewed many people. I tried to hire the best people I could. Some of the hires I made, I thought were great people, but you tell the same story over and over again. You talk to many people, especially in the tech area. It's really difficult to filter out people and to identify the right people. They might have the right technical skills, but then they might have personality issues, right? Or character issues that are not a great fit. Or, they might be great people, but they don't have the tech skills. So I think that's, it's difficult. So in a security product, complexity is your enemy, right? That's one lesson. So the dilemma here is security problems are complex to solve, but if your solution is complex, it's actually more difficult to sell, right? So many customers I talked to did not care that much about detection rates and the internals. They just wanted to see a green checkbox, right? Like banks sometimes said, yeah, you tell me about all the great detection you're doing and how you're better than your competition. But at the end of the day, I just want this to work. I want it to be easy to set up. And I would just want to see one display where it says green light. And if it's red, I want to know right away, okay, how do I fix it? I don't care about how it works and why your machine learning is better than the other guy, right, or girl, right? They did not care about that. So surprise, well, it's actually not a surprise, but it turns out your UI is critical. But of course, Apple knew this, right? Some of the products we competed against did really well because they initially invested quite a bit of effort in just developing the UI rather than all the fancy detection in the background, right? Did they do better detection? In my opinion, they did not, but they did better sales, right? So where do you actually draw the line? So the best product is the one that sells itself and that your sales folks can understand, which is an obvious lesson. Yes, I know, but it's absolutely true. Unfortunately, if you created a product that's actually complex, it's difficult to explain. People are not going to get it, right? And your salespeople, they might be smart, but they just want to get a fast couple of messages. They want to go out there and pitch your product and sell it, right? Lesson 5 is, and this is from Friends, the famous pivot scene. If you're starting a company, be prepared to pivot, right? It sounds like an obvious lesson. And I think a lot of startup people know this, actually, investors know this, but it's absolutely true, right? We originally wanted to sell an anti-botnet solution, and we discovered pretty quickly, nobody wants it. Nobody really needs it, right? That would not have been my expectation. So we pivoted at least twice. We created products for like sandboxing, similar to FireEye. That's what we based the company on going forward. And when that started becoming, sort of less popular or more established, we then pivoted to AI-based detection because we had a lot of, machine learning types of things going on already. So we built a new product around it and expanded things based on sandboxing, right? But, be prepared. What you're going to sell later is not exactly what you want to sell at the beginning. Things change quite a bit. So lesson 6 for me was based on my experience. As tech people, we tend to ignore the importance of support, but keeping customers is tough, and they love great tech, but they really want to have great tech support. So if I would do anything like this again, I think I would take support very seriously from the beginning. And a company I like actually that does this really well is Warby Parker, right? So this glasses company, their tech support is great. If I have problems, I send them an email, and I found them to be very reactive, and they just make you happy, right? Amazon is known to have great support. And I think that's one reason for their great success, right? Anyone who's actually interacted with them knows if you have a problem, they typically solve it, right? So this is not something we focused on initially, right? But I think it's important if you want to get customers and keep customers, this is something they ask for. And if your product is complex, support will become a nightmare from installation to maintenance, right? And we did end up having a complex product, which became better later on. But like initially, I think some of the issues we were having were just because of the complexity of how things ended up being, right? But with good support and less complex product, things just become automatically better, in my opinion. It's extremely challenging to find top-notch support people, according to my experience. I interviewed many people. It turns out many people don't want to work in support. They want to either work on coding or quality assurance or something related to development. But it's an old lesson. It turns out, yeah, you have support people, and some of them are great. I think my internet connection became unstable. Hopefully it'll be okay. I'm recording anyway. Some of them are great, but yeah, it's difficult to identify those really good people in support. So lesson 7, developing and selling an enterprise product is actually quite tough. You need to provide features that are tangential to your innovation, but that are still needed, right? Sales cycles are typically very long, and sales folks cost a lot of money, especially in the enterprise field. Okay, cool. I just thought that my connection broke for a second, but apparently all is good. The sales cycles are very long. A company might love your product, but it takes them 3 to 4 years to replace the current investment they've made, right? Which means that as a young company, if you're actually burning money and you're hiring people, well, maybe they're going to love your product at some point, but you still need to wait for that large bank for them to buy your product, even though they might tell you, this is great, we like it. But right now we already invested $10 million in this other product. You can't just replace it, come back in 3-4 years. That's a long time in a startup's life. Be prepared to have many meetings without success. Again, this is something that can be extremely emotionally draining. I've made many trips to countries like Asia, where I also ended up meeting customers, trying to convince them. And some of these meetings were highly unsuccessful, right? You go there, you spend a lot of time, a lot of money, you go to conferences, and then at the end of the day, you have nothing, right? You just basically, I even lost my voice talking to people, right? In some of these venues. So be prepared to have many meetings without success. Just be mentally prepared, right? Be prepared to explain the same story over and over again, right? And this is also emotionally draining, and it just wears you down after a while, right? It's always the same story. It's always like teaching the same thing over and over again. And of course, you need to show excitement, right? But giving the same message. And be prepared to hear, I have never heard of you guys before, right? Regardless of the stage you're in. Initially, you hear this all the time. And later on, maybe you're a larger company, you're in the news, etc. But there'll be people who are going to tell you, last night, sounds interesting. Never heard of you guys. So what do you do? And it's always the same story, right? So yeah, you can have name recognition, but you're competing against larger companies with a lot of money for marketing, or you're going to have less money for marketing, less name recognition. So lesson 8 is, it turns out your PhD and your job as computer science faculty, in my opinion, has actually prepared you quite well for starting a company, which is something I had not thought about before, but I actually realized it, right? For example, in a lot of the interactions I've had with industry people, I actually realized many of them can't write. A lot of them can't spell, right? Because they don't need to. So when they have to write something down or explain something, they're actually not great at it, right? But as an academic person, what we write, we know about describing things. So that I thought was, for the three of us at least, Chris, Giovanni, and myself, which is something that we were always able to do quite efficiently, right? So you know how to deal with politics and emotional drama already, being in a university. So I don't need to tell you, right? People come, people go, people create drama, and your students create drama, right? So you already have some experience dealing with that. You already have some leadership and motivation experience. Anyone who's running a lab, especially a larger lab, knows that you need to motivate your people. They need to publish. You need to help your students. So you actually have that experience already. You have the experience of creating a lab culture, right? You know how to generate novelty. So every time you look at ideas as computer science faculty, the first question we ask is, yeah, but how is this novel? Or how is it better than this other solution, right? And we actually know this, and that's an important part of selling something, right? You need to tell people why your product is better. You need to identify the novelty. And as faculty, we already have that experience. Another key experience we have is we know how to present, how to explain stuff, and how to communicate, right? A lot of us do this all the time. We teach, right? We go to conferences, we give presentations, we mentor our students about how to give presentations. So this is something we've been doing for quite a while. As a result, we have that experience, and that experience is extremely important in a company as well, right? You need to present in front of your customers. You need to convince them. You need to answer questions, right? And you need to impress them. And you already have that experience. You know how to take abstract ideas and make them more concrete, right? Which is something that also happens in a startup, because you start off with a general idea. There's a problem. You want to create a new product, but you don't know how to get there. And our experience in creating papers and research is, well, we can often take abstract ideas. We start slowly, and then we can start converging on something that's more concrete, right? We have that experience, which I thought was also beneficial, being faculty and then having been involved in a company. And finally, well, one of the last points actually is you have experience in marketing, right? A lot of us, well, it's a sad reality as faculty is that you market yourself, right? You publish papers, you go out there, you have a reputation, you talk about your work, right? And you're trying to market yourself. If you want to be successful, if you want to be visible faculty, well, that's part of the job during the tenure process, right? When people get to know you, well, they get to know your work and you're marketing yourself, you create websites. And yeah, that marketing experience also ends up being important when you are creating a company because you're actually selling a product. Let me see if yeah. So I'm actually wrapping up, so I'll have time for questions as well. You also have experience in hiring tech talent because we actually hire students and we basically are able to identify talent, right? I have two more lessons that I'll quickly go through and I'll take some questions. You can raise millions of dollars, you can hire hundreds of people, burn through cash. It doesn't mean that you will actually succeed, right? At the end of the day, you need to generate value and sell your product. And if your product does not sell, eventually your company will go down, regardless of how much money you've actually raised. And there are many examples of tech companies out there. And my experience has been many academics seem to believe that just because you have raised 50 million, it means that you already made it, right? So, during the time that we were working on Last Line, people were hearing that we were raising money and they automatically assumed, all right, you guys are super successful. Not necessarily, right? Until the end, everything can go wrong. There are different stages, different challenges. Not necessarily the case. Lesson 4, which is the final lesson. Academic environments have emotional drama and conflict, but startup environments have more of it, right? In academic disputes, the stakes are often not that high. You have disputes among tenured faculty. So what happens? Nothing, right? You say, I want that room. Some other person says, no, I want it. I see fights like that I find completely useless, right? Lots of things. People have nothing to lose. But in a tech company, human drama can be more significant. It can create more damage because there are real things at stake, right? People can lose their jobs. Company can go down, can become very toxic very, very quickly. Many examples of that. And people will complain a lot, sometimes to hide their own incompetence, which is something I've seen a lot. If there's lots of complaining, sometimes it's justified, but in some cases, it's not justified. It's just that they can't succeed, because they've succeeded before. They have to find, it can't be them, right? It has to be something else. It has to be the company. And you need to work really hard to create a good working environment, things like football tables, free food, etc. So if I were to create a company again, just briefly, I would focus on the tech. I would try to keep it small and would try to sell the tech to some other company. I think that, creating an enterprise level company is a lot of work. I would try to stay away from, enterprise sales, but might try to focus on end users. It's a different type of beast, I know, but it could be useful. And these days, I think fintech security is interesting. There's a lot of money there just because, and I think it might actually be easier to get money or maybe even sell the product. So to conclude, before I take questions, I talked a bit about my experiences in co-founding and helping grow Last Line. Having an academic background, the experience was fulfilling, but very stressful and tough at times. I think we learned a lot, but it's nicer if you can say you've learned a lot, but you've had some success because, at the end, maybe whole thing explodes and you haven't learned a lot, but not gained anything. And taking academic systems security research and having an impact in industry is actually not easy, I find, but it's actually very possible. And I know a lot of cases, so I would encourage everyone to try it, especially in academia. Thanks a lot. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions if you have any. Hello?
Okay. Yes, so let's thank Engin. And I think it's a great talk because it actually helped the listener to go against what Kierkegaard told us, that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So that's a good thing. So let's have questions, and we have some hands raised. So let's see, according to the order. Shujun, please.
I believe Philip had his hand before me, so Philip first, maybe.
Oh, Philip, okay, Philip.
No, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. This was an excellent presentation. Engin, could you describe some of the challenges in managing your faculty career and running a startup? First of all, just how did you do it time-wise?
Yeah, no, a great question. So I think what I did, because when I came to the US, I didn't have a green card, so I actually could not work for the company, so I had to be full-time faculty. So I spent a lot of my free time. The university in the US are actually quite flexible with respect to how much time they allow you to consult. So that's what I did. So, and the lucky part was I was full-time faculty, but Chris Krugel and Giovanni Vigni actually took a leave of absence. So they covered for me. So I was helping out, but they actually took a leave of absence, which is something that the investors were actually expecting. So it's good to have a good team of people who can actually also cover you if you cannot take a leave of absence. And I was on sabbatical, so that gave me the opportunity to invest some time for the company. So in the US, I think it's easier. In Europe, it might be a bit more challenging.
Thank you.
Shujun?
Okay, so actually, I actually had exactly the same question as Philip, and about how you actually split your academic, work and the new startup, because in the UK at least, it's nearly impossible to split your time that much. You can't apply to your, dean or head of a school. Yeah. I mean, they will say, no, don't do this.
Right. No. So I think in the US, one reason why I moved to the US is just because of the flexibility, because they want their faculty to actually create companies. It's also a success story for the university. And at Northeastern, for example, we have 4 months of time where we can do anything we want. So within the year, you try to split, you balance your teaching, late evenings, weekends. It takes a lot of your free time as well. Yeah. But over the time, the challenges change, right? And we started having more professional people, CEOs and salespeople. My involvement also got reduced to more specific things. So over time, I felt as the company grew, at least for me personally, the involvement became less in terms of like product development, because you had professional people doing it. I was more of a thought leader, maybe giving talks, talking to customers and things like that. So the involvement also changes. It gets easier over time.
Yeah. So I also want to follow up about another point you mentioned about the difference between Europe and United States, because I had some limited experience of trying to get money for some patentable ideas. So, and I found it's indeed quite difficult. There were quite a lot of unsuccessful meetings, as you said. And I was wondering, because you were in Europe, although I think you were in France or somewhere, so you're in Austria, so you're in different places. Do you have more concrete sort of points about how different this European culture in terms of innovation and investment and versus the American one, the North American one? So is this like a different order, like is it 10 times more difficult, or is just 2 times?
I think it depends on where you work. For example, Eurocom was very, very restricted with respect to IP. So, when I actually joined, I said, look, I worked on this thing called Anubis, just to clarify that they had no role in this, right? So because it was more of a private and public institution, it was a mix. So it really depends on where you work. I think Europe could have the advantage that when you kick things off, there are all these programs that companies have where they actually give you some money to create a company, right? Because they want that. So that can be an advantage. I think the downside in a country like France or like Austria probably is hiring people and firing them is just more difficult, right? And for a startup, you need to be able to hire people and maybe tell them the next day, okay, it's not working out, goodbye, right? It's easier in the US. So I feel creating a new company, especially with Silicon Valley, with all the tech going on, it's just easier. And also internationally, just get more visibility. I know successful European companies, but maybe founding it there and then moving it to the US is something they often do.
Okay, thank you. So Moti, I think there's a question in the
there is a question in the chat. Maybe I will repeat it. It's from Alexander Augusto Giron, and the question is, I will quote, "Very interesting presentation. Congratulations. Do you have any thought or opinions regarding research innovation ecosystem to ease the transition process?
Right. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure I understand. Regarding research and innovation ecosystems. You mean what kind of research and innovation would make it easier? Well, if my interpretation is correct, a lot of us have experienced open sourcing stuff. And if you're open sourcing something, like Cuckoo Sandbox was an open source project, right? Even something like that could be easy for the transitioning process to a company, because then you've done something or you set up a service, people use it, you do it for free. At some point, like we did, I think it just creates this reputation and people are then maybe willing to invest money in it, or they just acquire it, which is something I've also seen.
I guess if Alexandra wants to clarify, and
yeah,
he or she probably can. I did try to ask him or her to unmute. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, may I ask another question if I'm allowed?
Absolutely.
So can I ask why you are still in academia rather than go to, for instance, last line? Because it looks very successful and you clearly get a lot of experience of running companies, I guess, or co-founding companies. Do you still see a huge difference between academics and commercial world, so that you still prefer to be in academic because that allows you to do something still very different? So it's just about in terms of, because clearly there are a lot of challenges in commercial world, but you are very successful in terms of getting last line,
Oh, so my preference at the end of the day,
yes.
is that no?
Yeah,
it's a great question.
yeah.
So I would say, before COVID hit, I actually really enjoyed going into the office here, the last line office. I just found it fun. It's so you didn't have to deal with funding, you didn't have to deal with students, like some concrete tasks. So I enjoyed that a lot. But at the end of the day, I still like teaching. I like doing research and I like the flexibility of being at a university. And that's the reason why, when VMware acquired last time, they asked us, okay, who would like to stay? And I decided, no, I rather prefer to go back to the university. Maybe I would have made a bit more money, but at the end of the day, I really like being faculty. I just like the flexibility, like engaging with students. So that's my preference. And I think Chris and Giovanni, I would say definitely same. So they're definitely, I feel like they're definitely going back to UCSB at the end of this.
It's academic freedom. So
yes,
what do we like, basically?
Whatever, however you define freedom.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, but it's not just freedom. I mean, even when you run the company, if you run the company, you run it on your ideas. It's still, you value the ideas, the concepts, the implementation, and then you want to continue it, and you go back to academia. Then you start doing something else. Maybe there will be another company when it's mature.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
But now you know how to start it. Now when you hire next time salespeople, now you know what they are.
I think so.
Before you
so it's not. Yeah.
Like what I learned over the years from industry, sales is the face of the company in some sense. They are not sales;
Absolutely.
They are your face. So you have to hire people that represent your face to the outside. These are very important.
Yeah.
And things like this. Yes.
Absolutely.
Now
so I think a lot of us in academia, actually, we don't realize how important sales is, right? We tend to typically dismiss them, which was also my mindset initially. But yeah, like you say, the company exists because of them, right? Sales and marketing, super important, and you need very smart people there.
Yeah. So now you are back in academia, and now you have the great experience of a company with a success, because not every startup is successful. This is to remind the people. It's not just you start something and it's guaranteed. So it's great. And now I think returning back to academia is the best, because maybe there is a next thing. Maybe there is something else. I think it's a better base for developing technology for the future. And if it's mature, you can go. If you stay in a company, you are committed to something that you already put all the tech knowledge into it, and now you can. there are times in research to concentrate and time to branch out. And now it's a little bit branching out in order to concentrate again with perhaps another company if it makes sense. I see it very logically. For me, it's very logical. As a research in industry, I do the same, but within a company.
Right. No, I completely agree. This freedom is really nice, and the ability to create new things. And that's our huge advantage as, especially as faculty, because not many jobs offer that, right? And you can also take some time off in theory, right? So basically you can say, okay, now I'm tired a little bit. I'm going to enjoy my summer for a couple of months, like a sabbatical. You come back with fresh ideas, which you can't really do in industry. It's constantly pressure. You need to sell. That doesn't really change. So I think that we're in a lucky position. So I would encourage more people to go out and try something like this if they can.
Okay, so Moti, I think we probably have to close this session because we have 4 minutes to the next session. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Engin, again. Thank you, people who ask questions, and I think we learned a lot.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Thank you.